In the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific War, a different kind of hunter prowled the night skies. They were not sleek fighters, but lumbering, long-range flying boats with a deadly purpose. We now uncover the incredible history of the PBY Catalina patrol bombers in The Story of the Black Cats. Now restored and in full color, this film reveals the crucial, often overlooked role of these versatile aircraft. Painted black for camouflage, the Black Cats flew daring, low-level missions under the cover of darkness. They became the scourge of Japanese shipping, disrupting vital supply lines with torpedoes and bombs. A fascinating part of their story is their dual role. By day, these same aircraft transformed into angels of mercy. Known as Dumbos, they flew perilous air-sea rescue missions, saving countless downed airmen from the sea. This is the story of the crews who mastered the slow but resilient PBY, turning it into a legendary weapon and a symbol of hope in the lonely Pacific.
Night waters of the Southwest Pacific, enemy waters, sea roads for the passage of Japanese armaments going south to smash U.S. troops fighting for island beaches. Domain of the escort destroyer, guarding convoys of anti-aircraft, machine guns, concrete for pillboxes. Then, one night, suddenly, mysteriously, 2 ships were wiped out of a convoy. 1 ship left burning. 1 sunk. This was only the beginning. In 1 month, 41,000 tons of Japanese cargo vessels were sunk, 43,000 damaged. Next month, 13 ships attacked, 6 damaged, 7 sunk. News of the losses leak out. Radio Tokyo invents alibis. New American superplanes reported in the Pacific, surpassing anything known in speed and maneuverability. Reverberations in the Japanese High Command. New detachments of night fighters called up. Japanese fleet adjustments made. More destroyers, cruisers for convoy escort. The attacker was an unidentified American plane hitting at night. They bombed the destroyers, light cruisers, heavy cruisers. What is this superplane? Anything familiar? That torso with a middle-aged sag? Her speed less than some cars can do. Maneuverable? Some days all right. On others she brings around like a 10-ton truck. She dives under protest. Wings can't handle half the pressure dive bombers take. Got her? Right. The old Cat, Navy Catalina patrol boat, PBY in a black nightgown for night camouflage. A black cat. She hides by day in one of the secret U.S. Navy cat bases, which the enemy would love to know about. It's 8 a.m. Base personnel watching for a black cat overdue. Last heard from at midnight, attacking a Japanese merchant ship. But they don't watch long. Here comes the cat, and it's a zoom, a signal that she did it again. One more enemy ship on the bottom. Plowing around for the lee shore now and quiet waters. A wait for the tow line. Up the ramp, tail first. The squadron commander, wanting to know any wounded? After 14 hours of flight. Commodore Combs, commander of the task force, arrives in his jeep with Captain Peck in charge of the group. Large freighter made 2 bombing runs. Exploded ammunition cargo. Now off to get details and new plans for the coming night's mission. And that beer, which all hands look forward to. But there's 1 bottle left over. A Navy cameraman hit on the first run, so no pictures. But tonight's another night with a mate to take his place. As soon as the cat's home, she's groomed for the next prowl. That's a blitz buggy towing her into position for overhaul. Some job for a maintenance officer keeping an aerial antique acting like a dive bomber. The bad symptoms sheet. Port propeller throwing oil. Nothing serious, but a new part is needed. These cats take plenty. Some here are nearly 4 years old. Now, 8 bullet holes, starboard wing. 6, 7, 8. Not so bad. Black cats have wheezed home with more than 100 holes showing through their sides. It came out here, the shrapnel that nicked our cameraman. Such holes are penciled first, clipped, a plate board, riveted. A leak in the fuel tank plug. Gas goes in. Don't ration it. We'll be up all night and part of the next day. Last night's strain told on the tail assembly. Repaired now, wagging her tail and raring to go. But first she needs her claws sharpened. The Black Cat's bomb dump. Quarter-tonners. And this, the size Japanese cruisers have a weakness for. 50 calibers, defense against Japanese fighters tonight. The tail fin screwed on tight. When you swan dive through anti-aircraft, you want bombs that lay in right. Back to the cat. Patrol boats weren't made for bombing. She wears them under her wing because there's no other place. For every pound of bombs dropped last month, 1 ton of enemy shipping was sunk or damaged. Records like that mean plenty in any language, dollars or yen. Now a tin fish for the port wing. And the 50 caliber just in case, but we'd rather not have to use it. Darkness is the cat's best defense. Darkness and her black nightgown. But the guns are checked. And the cat stands ready, feeling her years, but as fit for combat as good wishes can make her. But first, looking for a stowaway aft. Yes, 2 kinds of black cats at this base. Overside you. In the meantime, the crew we're flying with in an hour is off for a spot of water polo. Coconuts to you. Now a quick look in on the officers' quarters. Our cat's Masters, that's the squadron commander at the mirror. Big game hunters at night, but the housekeeping has to be done. Evening clothes, 45s, jungle knives, just in case luck runs out and you have to walk home. And the picture. Off for briefing. Final instructions. Final warnings. Six black cats will fly tonight. They're pilots and navigators. First discussion. New angles of enemy strategy. To draw more blood from U.S. invading troops, Japan is feeding key defenses with ammunition, guns, concrete for pillboxes. Our objective, to stop them at sea, where one bomb can sink what 100 bombing runs ashore might not destroy. Latest enemy convoy sighting, southbound, 1 tanker, 3 freighters, probably artillery and ammunition, estimated position at 0200. Watch out for Japanese night fighters, nearest airstrip only 60 miles away. Any destroyer escorts? 2 cans like this, 5-inch guns, elevation for anti-aircraft barrage, 2 aft, 1 forward. 2 ack topside, and you may have a light cruiser on your hands, one sighted yesterday in that area. The search plan for locating the convoy. Area A for the command plane. Area B. Whoever spots the convoy first will signal other planes immediately, including the 2 standby planes. Command plane will direct attack. On the way north, the command plane will search enemy-held Harbor X, where the convoy may have dropped anchor temporarily. Watch out for land ack, there's plenty. A nest of 6 heavies to the north. 2 heavies here, 4 mediums south. Last topic, weather. On some nights, even more of a headache than ack. Storm fronts building up to the north, 30-knot headwinds to fight on the way home. Turn back early. If the night clears, don't make a target out of yourself by getting in front of the moon. Now, a half hour left for some quick chow. Command plane overside in 5 minutes. Sandwich makings from home. California sardines, Chicago ham spread, orange juice from Florida to wash it down. A squall bearing down from the sea, but the cats leave per schedule. In all the space's history, foul weather has never stopped a flight. She slides in, hull settling deep under bomb-laden wings. Landing gear disengaged, wallowing out for the takeoff. Giving away into the run, motors growling over the job of lifting too many men off the water. Too much gas, but she's up on the step. Gear off. Another night, another mission, another prowl into the dark. A cat needs its 9 lives on these jobs. Night, and the weather kicks up. Rough enough to be airsick if you had time. But getting nearer Harbor X, where the convoy might be hiding out, weather or no weather, the cat gives up altitude to find out. Navigator to captain, Harbor X reckoned 10 miles ahead. Repeat to waist gunners. Harbor X 3 miles off port bow. A lookout posted in the Black Cat's nose. A last check of the land ack positions ahead. The moon breaks through, silhouetting the Cat. Enemy fighter planes coming up, Captain. Harbor X dead ahead. No convoy down there. Lower for a second look. Harbor X empty. Convoy still out at sea. Now to get out, quick. But we're spotted. We took one. Another. Night fighters hard off port beam. Stand by for a dive to hide. The Cat flattens out. Here's where a black nightgown counts. The Japanese need better glasses. Now a cautious bank to sea to resume convoy search. Convoy's original O200 position was 50 miles, bearing 5 degrees. Convoy off port bow. Tail end of the convoy, ammunition freighter. Position signaled to 5 other Black Cats, 0420 south, 15012 east. The plane veers into the wake of the cruiser. Other Cats arrive. Pick our angle on the cruiser. Then pounce. Press the pickle and lay an egg. A hit. Miss. Another run. A hit. Lane 3 goes in. Now the Cats get out, with 1 freighter sunk, 1 damaged, 1 tanker burning, a cruiser hit. The cost, Black Cat number 5, whose 9th life went up in the smoke of the freighter she sank. One more flight completed. 1 less convoy flying the rising sun. Another loss in losses adding up to billions of dollars in equipment that didn't get there. A job done by planes that can't maneuver but do, that can't dive, that can't rev up speed to wiggle out of a run but go in anyway for a second try, a third. What keeps them going? This, among other things, these are American troops grabbing at a beach guarded by pillboxes and machine guns, by Japanese cannon, mortars, grenades. These things don't grow there. They come in ships that can be sunk, and every less ship gives the men who are landing a better break. That's what keeps the cats flying.
Flying boats played an unforgettable role throughout World War II, marking their finest hour. For anti-submarine warfare, long-range transport, and air-sea rescue, these waterbirds were indispensable. From twin-engine patrol planes to giant six-engine bombers, they offered versatility and mobility to combatants on both sides of the war. And to its crew, the flying boat offered a distinct way of life and duty unmatched by any other type of aircraft.
It is the end of 1941. A squadron of Japanese pilots is launched from an aircraft carrier with the command, "Climb Mount Nitaka." Sunday, December 7th, the infamous day that will drag the United States into World War II. The Japanese air raid on Pearl Harbor will present a devastating example of carrier air power and foreshadow the future of modern naval warfare. Ironically, the surprise attack of these advanced fighter aircraft was almost thwarted by an old mainstay of naval aviation. A PBY patrol flying boat spotted a Japanese submarine less than 2 miles off the entrance to Pearl Harbor, 1 hour and 24 minutes before the attack. Acting in accordance with standing orders, the pilot dropped a depth charge on the intruder and reported his actions to base commanders. Unfortunately, it was the old story of the boy who cried wolf. The message was skeptically received and seen as the latest of many false alarms. The rest, of course, is history. Although the war's great naval battles would be won by the smaller carrier aircraft, ultimate victory hung in the balance of all naval air operations. A partnership that owed its success to the first days of naval aviation, long before a carrier had even been built. In 1911, Glenn Curtiss had perfected his hydroaeroplane at North Island Naval Base in San Diego, California, and delivered the U.S. Navy its first aircraft. But it was the flying boat, developed soon after, that gave the Navy the weapon it needed to cope with the changing face of modern warfare. These larger seaplanes could hold more fuel for extended flights and carry sizable bomb loads. When World War I introduced aerial combat, the flying boat distinguished itself as an aircraft that could patrol vast coastlines and fly far out to sea to attack submarines, the other new weapon of modern warfare. A capability that would prove essential in the next World War. This is the U.S. Coast Guard Air Station in San Diego, California, just prior to World War II. Over the last 30 years, the flying boat has become the mainstay of both Coast Guard and Navy patrol. This Hall PH-3 has served the Navy and Coast Guard extremely well throughout the 1930s. With its short takeoff capability and superior rough sea handling, it is ideally suited for air-sea rescue operations. But as a biplane, its days are numbered. Just blocks away from the Coast Guard station, the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation is busy building the latest and greatest addition to the Navy's Air Patrol Wing, the PBY Catalina. Nothing short of right is right. The slogan at the Consolidated plant in San Diego was taken to heart when they built the PBY. With bulkhead compartments, the hull of the PBY resembled a ship more so than an aircraft fuselage. All metal in construction, the PBY was the first of the Navy's seaplanes not to be designed with wires, fabric, and glue. The first production PBY-1 was accepted in 1936. More than 3,300 PBYs would eventually be produced, the largest number of a single flying boat type ever built. The PBY's maximum range far exceeded that of any other Navy plane, nearly 4,000 miles. For the first time, the Navy had an aircraft that could link the U.S. with its Pacific holdings and extend the defense perimeter far out to sea. Those who foresaw the coming of war considered this capability vital to America's security. And as war approached, the Navy began taking its new aircraft straight from the Consolidated plant for evaluation. Soon, San Diego Bay was teeming with PBYs. Today, San Diego Bay is still teeming with boats, but none have wings. In fact, today, there is not one flying boat serving in the U.S. Navy or Coast Guard. San Diego Bay has changed in 60 years. The old Consolidated Sea Ramp facility is now a vacant lot. North Island Navy Base has evolved substantially since Glenn Curtiss first developed the flying boat. Across the bay, the U.S. Coast Guard Air Station is still in operation. Semper Paratus, always prepared. When America entered World War II, the Coast Guard had been prepared to do its part as a component of the U.S. Navy. Stan Mahoney remembers using its seaplane facility for testing PBYs.
We used to taxi our PBYs, which were built right over here at Consolidated, taxi them right down here over this ramp and into the water because they were amphibians. Then we would test the PBYs by taking off San Diego Bay here, and we would probably test about 2 or 3 PBYs a day. When we got through with one, we'd go back and get another one, taxi it down, and do it all over again. That's kind of a nice remembrance. Looking at the old ramp there, it was kind of fun taxiing a PBY across that Harbor Drive and look down and wave at the people as you went by, you know. Kind of brings back memories.
The amphibian version of the PBY was delivered to the Navy in 1941. With tricycle landing gear, it could operate from land as well as water. These later models were also configured with transparent waist blisters housing gunner stations with .50 caliber machine guns. With increased production, the PBY set the standard for the Navy's long-range patrol as it could remain aloft for over 18 hours. Meanwhile, Consolidated had been producing its next aircraft for the Navy, the PB-2Y Coronado. This 4-engine flying boat was designed to meet the Navy's newest requirement for a large, long-range patrol bomber. While it provided greater cargo space than that of the PBY, The Coronado's deep hull was in fact necessary to facilitate a water takeoff for such a large aircraft.
You can get a lot of speed up, but unless you can get it to rocking and break the suction between the hull and the water, you just bounce along like a good boat. And it's when you get it broken loose, that's when you start picking up speed and get airborne. That's where the Coronado had it over the PBY, because they had this big square tube that went down and vented the step in the hull and give a little air in there to break the suction. That was a big help.
By the end of the 1930s, war was imminent on both sides of the globe. In the middle stood an isolationist America, adamantly opposed to any foreign entanglements. As the Coronado went into production, and the PBY promised a reliable patrol bomber, U.S. defense planners did the best they could to prepare for war, despite America's isolationist mood. And when war finally came, the flying boat proved both stalwart defender and ferocious attacker. After Great Britain and France declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, it was not long before Hitler would overrun Northern Europe. In less than 1 year, England would stand alone against Hitler's Luftwaffe. But with England came the entire British Commonwealth of Nations: Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, and South Africans all comprised a fighting force capable of withstanding 6 years of warfare on both sides of the globe. From the beginning, only the British Navy, key to England's survival, stood in the way of German naval control of the North Atlantic. To keep German raiders from attacking Allied shipping, the Royal Navy would now need the help of reconnaissance aircraft more than ever. Impressed with the PBY's performance, the British had ordered 50 PBY-5s in 1939 and named them Catalinas. The U.S. Navy liked the name and officially adopted it in 1941. In the spring of that year, Catalinas of the Royal Air Force's Coastal Command would deliver the British Navy a decisive victory in the North Atlantic. It is the end of May. The British Navy has been desperately searching for the 45,000-ton German battleship Bismarck, now at large in the North Atlantic. The Bismarck has already demolished one British battle cruiser and poses a serious threat to vital British convoys. RAF Catalinas join the hunt, and on May 26th, a PBY pilot sights the elusive Bismarck. As the Catalinas track the German raider, the British Navy closes in for the kill. While a formidable warship, the Bismarck is no match for Britain's numerical superiority. As she sinks to the bottom, so does Germany's hopes for maintaining a threatening surface navy. Thanks to the vigilance of the Catalina, British Coastal Command will continue to protect England's supply line and thereby frustrate Germany's attempts to strangle the British Isles into submission. One of 3 major RAF operational commands, Coastal Command was charged with maritime reconnaissance. Perhaps no other aircraft epitomized Coastal Command during World War II more so than the Short Sunderland. Built by the Short Brothers Aircraft Company, the Sunderland was an anti-submarine and long-range patrol bomber. The Sunderland's design benefited from the success of its commercial predecessor, the short S-23C class. Called Empire flying boats, they had enabled Imperial Airways to establish vital air links throughout the British Empire. Serving mostly on anti-submarine and long-range reconnaissance patrols, the four-engine Sunderland was a sturdy and dependable workhorse for its 10-man crew. Vic Hodgkinson, a Sunderland skipper of the Royal Australian Air Force, served in the North Atlantic.
The Sunderland was a very good aircraft. It took a lot of punishment, though we didn't have any armour plate, and later on they put some armour plate around the skipper. It wasn't a fast aircraft, but it had an endurance of, as I say, about 12 hours, the early ones. It was a good sea boat. It was fairly manoeuvrable. For a slow airplane, it was quite manoeuvrable.
Maneuverable and considerably armed, the Sunderland could withstand heavy onslaughts from German fighter aircraft, such that the Luftwaffe nicknamed it the Flying Porcupine. It was the first flying boat to be equipped with power-operated bow and tail gun turrets, 8 .303 caliber machine guns in all, 2 at the front, 4 in the rear, and 2 at the midsection.
Apparently called them porcupines because of the amount of armament we had on board the aircraft, which was, I suppose, quite a large amount for an aircraft in those days, but really it was very primitive. And the Germans thought we had cannon on board, thank heavens, because they normally gave us, in my day, gave us a wide berth. But the 303, as I mentioned, had a very poor range against the cannon. But close in, of course, you had the concentration of firepower. If you get them in close enough, then you had a chance of doing some damage.
Time was spent avoiding rather than attacking German aircraft. Instead, Sunderlands pursued a more stealthy quarry, the U-boat. Armed with mines, bombs, and depth charges, the Sunderland could be a deadly opponent. But more often than not, the German U-boat outpaced the lumbering Sunderland, stealing below the ocean's surface before damage could be done. This outcome was not entirely unsatisfactory.
Submarine work, of course, we flew patterns over an area where the submarines were expected to be. Mainly on the roundabout between the 100-fathom line off the coast of France and inshore. We didn't fly much closer than about 50 miles off the French coast. And the idea there was to keep the submarines under the water until they reached the 100-fathom line, which meant that they had to use their batteries. And by the time they got the 100-fathom line, they had to surface anyhow to charge them again. So that was the reason for that exercise. And of course, other times you met them further out to sea.
Sunderland, of course, was a gentleman's aircraft. I mean, it had upstairs, downstairs, galley, wardroom, flushing loo.
So the impressive thing about it is carries all mod cons aboard. You have your own kitchen and everything else there, and bunks and what have you.
The Flying Porcupine, it was actually because of the armour we had. You see, we had a mid-upper turret, and we had a front turret which had 4 Browning 303s. Then they altered that because after a while the subs started fighting back from the surface. They put fixed gun positions in, and we had 4.5 cannons in the front. The idea being that you could hit the subs as you were coming in to take them, and that would knock them out or knock their gunners out. And we also had 2 waist positions where we had .5s on swivels, so they used to come out of the side. Yes, we were. They did call us the Flying Porcupines. JQ-88s were the main people we worried about because they used to have a good range and they could come out, as far as we were.
Although the element of surprise was the U-boat's strong point, it operated best not beneath, but above the water's surface. It could move faster and destroy ships with greater accuracy and firepower. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill once stated that the only thing that ever frightened him during the war was the U-boat threat. With France, Norway, and the Low Countries lost to Hitler's war machine by 1940, the entire Atlantic seaboard from Norway to the Spanish border lay at Germany's disposal. U-boats ranged freely from French Atlantic bases out of the Bay of Biscay and wreaked havoc on British merchant shipping. Convoy escorts and their airborne guardians were needed more than ever as the Atlantic lifeline was stretched dangerously thin. In August of 1941, just prior to America's entry into the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill meet secretly on the USS Augusta to sign the Atlantic Charter, setting forth the aims of the war against Germany. A peculiar meeting between an active belligerent and a technically neutral country. Under the Lend-Lease Act, the United States has agreed to extend Britain's credit for war supplies, practically committing America's industrial resources to the defeat of Germany. The neutral U.S. was teetering on the edge of war. All that was needed was one final push. The surprise was complete. America's Pacific Fleet had been caught sleeping. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought World War II, finally, to America's doorstep. All of America was in shock. In San Diego, one naval officer, like all Americans, felt barely prepared. Captain Frank DiLorenzo.
Most everybody remembers where they were on the day of Pearl Harbor. I was flying for the Navy out of San Diego, and a bunch of other bachelors, and I had a house right in Coronado, California, and we were just sitting around a Sunday morning drinking Bloody Marys, and we got a telephone call. The fellow said he was a duty officer and said for us to get down to the squadron right away. Well, we thought it was a gag and hung up the phone, and the phone rang back immediately. It said, "Get your butts down to the squadron right now, we're at war." And we turned the radio on, and of course it was all full of the day of infamy, and we went down to the squadron, and mass confusion. We knew we were at war. We didn't know where the enemy was, but we knew we had to fly.
Immediately, attention focuses on America's first line of defense, the coastline. How far off the western coast have the Japanese come? Heavy patrol is imperative. The Coronado is one of the first long-range patrol planes the Navy deploys to guard the vast Pacific coastline. Although there never would be a Japanese invasion of America's coastline, the threat was there and the fear genuine. These large sentinels and other flying boats of World War II became the eyes and ears of the fleet. The Coronado could cover 2,300 miles non-stop to look for enemy activity, keeping the Navy alert and ready for mobilization at a moment's notice. Also, its great size could hold a 12,000-pound bomb load for an immediate attack if necessary. Additional duties included Navy personnel transport. Captain DiLorenzo once had the honor of flying Admiral Chester Nimitz to Pearl Harbor soon after the attack in order to take command of what was left of the Pacific Fleet.
Over Pearl Harbor, we invited the Admiral up to the flight deck and asked him if he would like to look at the site of what the Japanese had done to our fleet, and of course he eagerly accepted. And we flew around and made 2 or 3 turns around Pearl Harbor and around Hickam Field so he could survey all of the damage. And he shook his head and clucked his tongue. It was really a sickening sight. The California was sunk. The Utah had completely turned turtle. Her keel was sticking right straight up in the air. The Arizona had settled as where she is today. And there was oil all over Pearl Harbor, around Fort Island, a couple of inches thick. It was one of the most sickening sights that I have ever seen, and it's been indelibleized in my mind.
The losses suffered were enormous. Except for the 3 aircraft carriers that were luckily out at sea, the entire Pacific Fleet was damaged or destroyed. All 8 battleships were put out of action. Almost all of the aircraft were destroyed. More than 2,400 Americans were killed. Vice Admiral Bull Halsey, commander of the Pacific Carrier Task Force, launches air raids of his own on enemy shore bases to let the Japanese know that America is still a force to be reckoned with. The enemy counterattacks with superior aircraft, piloted by more experienced fighters. The Japanese Zero, although lightly armored, is faster and more maneuverable than the American Wildcat. But with time and training, American carrier fighters will gain the experience needed to eventually beat the Japanese at their own game. The age of the carrier aircraft has arrived. Meanwhile, Midway Island stands alone as America's outpost in the Central Pacific. Its continued survival depends largely on flying boats like the PBY. U.S. carrier aircraft will win the epic Battle of Midway. But before that battle begins, PBYs will report the advance of Japanese vessels and make the first torpedo attacks before the carrier even launches its first aircraft. Another 2-engine patrol bomber played an important part in guarding America's coastlines. From the factory of Glenn L. Martin, who had built the famous China Clipper, came the PBM Mariner. This flying boat was more advanced than the older PBY Catalina. Its distinctive gull wing and more powerful engines produced a faster, stronger aircraft. The popular PBM-3 version joined the U.S. Navy in the spring of 1942 and served exclusively in the Atlantic against German submarines until late 1943. The PBM-3D patrol bomber was equipped with 8 50-caliber machine guns in power turrets at the nose, dorsal, and tail positions. Endowed with airborne radar, it had impressive search capabilities. With an 8,000-pound bomb load capacity, the Mariner effectively and consistently intercepted German U-boats preparing to raid America's Atlantic seaboard. On the other side of the Atlantic, the Sunderland was doing its best to counter the U-boat menace. Sometimes, however, the greatest menace was not met at sea, but upon returning to base. Captain Hugh Birch of the Royal Australian Air Force.
The worst thing about flying out of England was the weather. Because, coming back to particularly a place like Oban in Scotland, where we were operating from at one stage, it was like flying up a tunnel at night, and the weather was shocking. Very, very strong winds and rain, snow. I think a lot of the younger Australian pilots lost their lives coming back to their base in England because they'd all been trained in very good weather here in Australia, and some in Rhodesia and some in Canada where the weather was good. and a lot of them lost their lives before they even got onto a enemy raid.
In the war between submarine and airplane, direct confrontation was more the exception than the rule. The greatest contribution maritime patrol gave to anti-submarine warfare was air deterrence. The number of U-boats actually sunk or damaged during the war is not high. They were, however, frequently forced to submerge far beneath the ocean's surface and thereby effectively deterred from attacking Allied shipping. When a direct attack could be made, as with this RAF Catalina, the effects were often lethal. The Catalina could hold 4 650-pound depth-charge bombs and, with a good hit, could seriously cripple or destroy an unlucky U-boat. On one routine U-boat patrol, Captain Hugh Birch and his Sunderland crew suffered an unexpected hit of their own.
We had one occasion when I was flying in the Bay of Biscay looking for a submarine, and we sighted a Dornier flying boat. And I decided it looked fairly slow. It would be a good idea to attack this, which we did, but suddenly there was a terrible explosion in our aircraft, and I asked the co-pilot to go down and see what was happening because the front gunner had stopped firing. And we'd been hit by 2 20mm cannon shells, one which blew the front off the front turret, and another one which caused a tear in the side of the starboard side of the aircraft about 12 feet long. So the whole airplane became very, very drafty. The front gunner was very badly wounded and fell back inside the aircraft, and we gave him morphia. And there was a happy ending to the story in that he married the nurse who was looking after him in hospital.
Like the Sunderland, this German Dornier flying boat was used for maritime reconnaissance. Its regular duties included reporting the locations of Allied shipping to German air bases on the mainland. From there, land-based torpedo bombers would be sent to attack the convoy at sea. Of all of Germany's World War II flying boats, the most impressive was the Blohm & Voss BV-238. Flying boats are traditionally known for their great size. In this, the BV-238 clearly excelled. An engineer could easily fit inside its massive engine nacelles. Designed for long-range reconnaissance, bomber and armed transport roles, the BV-238 was the largest flying boat ever built during the war. This prototype did not appear for flight tests until the spring of 1944. Before it could take on its bomber form, it was destroyed in a strafing attack by American Mustang fighters. With its long-range capability, the BV-238 could have easily carried its massive bomb load across the Atlantic Ocean had it appeared earlier in the war. Imagine bringing the war in Europe to American soil. The psychological impact to America's morale could have been as damaging as the physical impact to its war industry. World War II might have seen a different outcome. One giant flying boat that the Luftwaffe did have at its disposal was the Blohm & Voss BV-222 Viking. Originally built for transatlantic commercial air service, the Viking was adapted for wartime use as a long-range maritime reconnaissance and transport vehicle. Although smaller than the BV-238, the six-engine Viking was the largest flying boat in production and service during World War II. In fact, flying boats like the Viking continued to be the largest type of aircraft in production until the logistical demands of the war finally produced airstrips capable of supporting large land planes. "13 Vikings were built and served the Germans especially well, flying supplies and troops for use in North Africa. In British Africa, crude airstrips were hacked out of the thick jungle so that Allied land planes could maintain supply lines across the continent. While in West Africa, a flying boat base had been built with arguably less effort. Sunderlands operated off coastal waters in part for anti-submarine patrol. But they also flew huge shipments of supplies to East Africa, including Alexandria and other British seaports. The versatile Sunderland was not alone in this air transport role. The U.S. Navy used its large flying boats, like this PBM Mariner, for specific duty under the Naval Air Transport Service. Every war has been influenced by logistics. Success in the battlefield always depends on the strength of supply lines. Although the majority of Allied war supplies were carried in ships, a small but vital portion was flown in aircraft. Many Coronados and PBM Mariners were configured for transporting high-priority items from manufacturers in the United States to needy forces overseas. From propeller blades to Band-Aids, or just mail from home, these big flying boats could carry it all to the most remote parts of the world. And men, perhaps the most important cargo, battle-weary soldiers and sailors going home. In a matter of hours rather than days, these long-range flying boats carried men back to their families, across the oceans that had separated them for so long. By mid-1943, the Allies had stemmed the Japanese tide in the Pacific, and with the air support of PBY Catalinas, they began taking back the islands they had lost. The nights were soon filled with the growl of black cats. The legendary PBYs painted coal black for camouflage in nighttime raids. As Allied forces chipped away at Japan's empire by day, the black cats moved with them, knocking out enemy airfields and supply lines by night. Operating from hastily prepared bases in hidden lagoons, these cats highlighted the merit of flying boats. Especially as the island-hopping campaign toward Japan progressed. The battles were long and hard. It took months of bloody fighting through the Solomon Islands before the Japanese were finally forced out of Guadalcanal. U.S. naval and marine forces fought for every island inch, but the Japanese continued to be resupplied by the infamous Tokyo Express, a supply line of warships and cargo vessels that stole through the night and refreshed beleaguered Japanese defenses. This is where the Black Cats made their mark. As daylight faded, the Cats took off into the night. Armed with fresh rounds of ammunition and 4,000 pounds of torpedoes, bombs, or depth charges, they faced little opposition under the shroud of darkness. The slow-moving Catalinas were vulnerable to anti-aircraft and fighter attack during the day, but at night, fitted with airborne radar, they were stealthy and aggressive hunters. The Japanese, who did not have radar, were often unaware of a Black Cat approach before it was too late. Hunting in packs, the Black Cats pounced on exposed enemy ships, often with devastating results. Constant nighttime attacks like this left little room for reinforcement to Japanese troops. Throughout 1943 and 1944, The Cats helped neutralize counterattacks against the gradual advance of Allied forces. Many Marines owed much of their success to Black Cat operations. And the Cat crews knew who to thank: the old reliable PBY. Its ruggedness and durability could absorb heavy anti-aircraft fire and still limp home, sometimes with only one engine running. And if necessary, it could always make a safe water landing. The versatile Cats clearly earned their keep. Japan's chances for any further advance in the Central Pacific were destroyed at the Battle of Midway. Before the first shot was fired, U.S. fleet commanders had known that the battle would be won in the sky, not on the sea. In the end, the U.S. Navy won its first decisive victory in which the aircraft carrier was the essential instrument. Over the next 3 years, the carrier task force would lead the Allies to victory in the Pacific War. The writing was on the wall. The future of naval aviation lay with carrier air power. When these air battles were over, the less glamorous aircraft, the pioneers of naval aviation, had one last duty to perform: scour the watery battlefield for the hopeful survivor gone down in his plane. For air-sea rescue, the flying boat was hard to beat. Hundreds of downed pilots escaped a watery death thanks to the reliable PBY. And perhaps hundreds more owe their thanks because these patrol planes better prepared the fleet for battle with advanced reconnaissance. Flying boats would slowly fade away from naval aviation. But many lived to remember those ungainly waterbirds long after progress would forget them. Stan Mahoney does more than remember. As a flight engineer on both the PBY and Coronado during the war, his affection for the flying boat surfaces in a variety of ways. When he's not revisiting his old stomping grounds at San Diego Bay, he indulges in his favorite hobby.
I always did like to draw pictures of airplanes, even when I was a kid in school. In fact, I even got in trouble for drawing pictures. And so when I was in PSA, they used to tell me, why don't you draw those pictures when you retire and take them, sell them at the airlines, at the air shows? So that's how come I started drawing these airplane pictures, and they sell them at the air shows. And it's been a very enjoyable hobby. And I also like to write. I write all kinds of stories, and I even wrote a book called I'm in Aviation Now. It's the whole story about all this kind of flying, illustrated by myself. This is a drawing I did of sort of an exploded view showing the interior of a PBY, starting off with your gun station up in the bow, and then the bombardier station you can see there, and the pilot stations inside. Then you come to the radioman on the right-hand side of the hull, and on this side in this picture is the navigator's station. And then you go through a bulkhead into the next compartment, and the flight engineer is up in his little cubicle above the hull, clear up above it, with a window on each side. That was really neat. Yeah, the window on the right next to your shoulder, and a window on the left next to your left shoulder. You could look out either way, but you couldn't look forward because all your instruments were forward. Aft of that is the bunk room. And then aft of that, there's another bulkhead there. After that is the two blisters where the gunners were stationed with the 50 caliber guns. Then aft of that, there's another bulkhead. After that is a tunnel hatch, which could be opened, and there was a 30 caliber gun back there as well.
As with all flying boats, PBY crews shared a special affection for their aircraft. Part plane, part boat, its missions took them where no other aircraft could go. And life on board brought a feeling of being part of something unique.
All flying boat pilots regarded themselves as a race apart, and we used to develop the myth of the flying boat crews. And as somebody once wrote to its crews, the Sunderland was much more than just a good machine. It represented a wholly distinct way of life. As with no other aircraft used by the Royal Air Force, it became war chariot, home, bed and board to the men who flew in it. A unique relationship between man and machine, firmly established from the very beginning, with its highly esoteric way of life and attitudes, the near-naval terminology in everyday speech, and by no means least, an extraordinarily close comradeship. Once airborne, a Sunderland was literally a self-contained war unit of men and machine with a breadth of possible situations and actions unknown to any land plane. So I think that's a fairly good description of the Flying Boat Union.
All crew members were just like a family. They all knew one another. They knew their families. They knew what their families at home were. And each member of the crew had specific duties, and some could do some things better than others. Like one guy could be a better cook. Another could be better at grabbing the buoy. Maybe he could hang out there and grab the buoy better than someone else. And we all worked together.
With the Japanese surrender in 1945, a war ends in which the flying boat faces an uncertain future. The aircraft carrier has succeeded the battleship as the primary naval attack ship and has become the new champion of naval aviation. While World War II was the flying boat's finest hour, it was also the beginning of the end. The increasing availability of fixed airstrips built for use in the war and the advantages of operating aircraft from such facilities signaled the demise of both the military and commercial flying boat. "50 years later, the flying warboats are still flying, through the spirit and in the memories of the men who flew them. When Stan Mahoney flips through his old logbook, the flying boat is alive once again.
This goes back to the first flights I made in a PBY. You look in here and see where you did something that brings the story back. So then I turn around and write the story in the book. It kind of helps you to enjoy life, see. After all, you know, I'm getting up there. See? I'm 82. So kind of keep me going.
The short Mayo Composite was a unique aircraft built by Short brothers in the late 1930s. In fact, it consisted of two separate aircraft, the Mercury and the Maya, taking off together and then parting ways. This remarkable story started in 1932, with Major Robert Mayo as Technical General Manager for Imperial Airways. The whole experiment was an attempt to solve the problem of building a passenger aircraft capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean without discarding cargo space for extra fuel. Short brothers had already built and successfully sold the Empire class of flying boats, which were used to carry mail to the farthest reaches of the British Empire. Overland routes to Australia and South Africa were frequent, but one insurmountable challenge still existed: the Atlantic crossing. Certainly, the ocean had been crossed many times before, but only by small aircraft with no commercial application. Shorts wanted to fly the route not for fame, but for commercial reasons. It was determined that much fuel was expended during takeoff, since flying boats took a particularly long time to become airborne. The solution was obvious: attach a seaplane to a mothership and conserve fuel for the long trip across the ocean. With this, the Mayo Composite was born. The lower half of the duo, Maya, was a heavily modified Empire flying boat. Its wings were enlarged and engines moved to accommodate its mounted passenger. And for the upper half, named Mercury, a long-range 4-engine floatplane was constructed. With a crew of 2, it could carry 1,000 pounds, or about half a ton of mail. With all 8 engines working together, the pair easily lifted off and soared upwards. The 2 aircraft were connected with specially made struts. At a set altitude, these would be detached and Mercury would continue on its journey, while Maya returned to base. Here, test pilots John Lancaster Parker and Harold Piper say a few words following a successful flight.
Well, damn it, I have never shaken you by the hand before, but there you are.
Excuse my glove.
Fine. And I don't know what your impressions were when we left, but I found the weather was much better than I expected it to be, and everything was going right, so I very quickly asked you your opinion. And you seemed quite content with anything I wanted to do, so I pulled the plug and you disappeared.
The Mayo's first transatlantic flight took place on February 6, 1938. The journey from the west coast of Ireland to Montreal, Canada, took 20 hours and 21 minutes to complete, with an average ground speed of 137 miles per hour. With the Atlantic now conquered, it was decided to make an attempt for the world distance record, from Dundee, Scotland, to Cape Town, South Africa, in a single flight. Publicly, Imperial Airways claimed not to be interested in breaking records, but the starting location was moved from Southampton to Dundee. This extra distance would give Mercury the range needed to beat the standing record held by Russia of 6,300 miles. Sadly, mechanical problems with the fuel pump forced the aircraft down near Alexander Bay, less than 400 miles short of its target.
The Royal Air Force's Sunderland was Britain's iconic flying boat of the Second World War. The type was built by Short brothers, and it went on to serve for many years, and indeed in many places, well after World War II. Sometimes called the Flying Porcupine because it bristled with defensive firepower, it is perhaps best known for its role in protecting Allied convoys during the critical Battle of the Atlantic. In this theater, the Sunderland flew alongside American-built PBY Catalinas and scoured the North Atlantic Ocean for German U-boats, which at one stage had almost succeeded in choking the flow of vital material to war-torn Britain. An ever-increasing amount of airmail. The Sunderland military flying boat was ordered by the British government at about the same time as the Empire boats, but as the RAF's peacetime needs were less pressing than the airmail service, Sunderlands came into service later. Although the two types shared the same basic design, there were still some major differences. The Sunderland's nose was longer, which was necessary to accommodate the forward gun turret, and other alterations were made for the rear defensive position below the rudder. Provision was also made for waist guns, although latter models had a power turret above the middle of the fuselage. It's a small wonder that the Sunderland would earn the respect of Luftwaffe pilots, who dubbed it the Porcupine. Clearly, Short Brothers had produced a true man of war, and as such, where it might operate would be less than predictable, so a deeper hull was provided to cope with harsher conditions. The Sunderland's interior would offer none of the luxury of the Empire boats, although there were many facilities that few other military aircraft of the time could provide.
Sunderland, of course, was a gentleman's aircraft. I mean, it had upstairs, downstairs, galley, wardroom, flushing loo.
So the impressive thing about it is carries all mod cons aboard. You have your own kitchen and everything else there, and bunks and what have you.
The Flying Porcupine, it was actually because of the armour we had. We had a mid-upper turret, and we had a front turret which had 4 Browning 303s. Then they altered that because after a while the subs started fighting back from the surface. They put fixed gun positions in, and we had 4.5 cannons in the front. The idea being that you could hit the subs as you were coming in to take them, and that would knock them out or knock their gunners out. And we also had 2 waist positions where we had .5s on swivels, so they used to come out of the side. Yes, we were. They did call us the Flying Porcupines. JQ-88s were the main people we worried about because they used to have a good range and they could come out, as far as we were.
Meanwhile, the United States and Russia had both contemplated long distances and heavy loads, and were already building to suit. Aircraft like the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress were starting to demonstrate their worth as effective strategic weapons that might hold the balance of power if another major conflict was to erupt. By 1936, British war planners were looking for an answer from its aircraft industry under Ministry Specification B-1236. The most promising concept came from Supermarine aircraft, with its Model 317, which was quickly commissioned. However, as a backup, Short Brothers offered its Model S-29, which was most fortunate as later the Supermarine bomber project was completely destroyed in a German bombing raid. Thankfully, the Short Brothers offering had been developed in very quick order due to the fact that it used many of the Sunderland's parts. In fact, Model S-29, now named the Sterling, was in many ways a Sunderland with the hull and lower deck removed. Of course, there was much reworking to make the change effective, but the lineage was clearly there to be seen. The Sunderland's wings were especially quick to be adapted from the flying boat, although here ministry intervention was to provide yet another interesting tale. Originally, the Sterling would have had almost the exact same wings as the Sunderland, with a span of 112 feet. However, the ministry insisted that the wingspan be reduced to less than 100 feet to fit into certain early RAF hangars. The shorter wings severely reduced the Sterling's high-altitude performance, and also required a longer distance for the aircraft to become airborne. To get Sterlings in the air quicker, longer landing wheel legs were developed to increase the wing angle as the bomber was taking off. However, Short Brothers' first attempt at a retractable undercarriage would also be problematic. Curiously, the shortened wing actually had its advantages, mainly because it allowed the aircraft a high rate of roll, which made it very agile and more able to avoid attacking fighters. Born out of a famous flying boat, the Sterling was generally very well liked by its crews, perhaps in some small part because it actually provided one crew bunk, another link to its Sunderland ancestry. By 1946, Sterlings were out of service with the RAF, with over 2,400 being built in 5 years, many of them by the Austin Car Company in Birmingham. This output was actually 3 times greater than that of the Sunderland flying boat that had spawned the bomber's creation. Sunderland flying boats flew on till the 1960s. When the last active example, one of the 777 built, was finally retired from the Royal New Zealand Air Force in 1967.
The JRM-1 Martin Mars was the largest flying boat ever to enter production. Initially intended as a long-range bomber and ocean patroller, the Martin Mars was redesigned as a long-range general transport. Martin developed the Mars at its factory in Middle River, Maryland, and the original prototype, known as Old Lady, was launched in 1941. Although the Navy ordered a total of 20 Mars flying boats, by the time the prototype was fully tested, the end of World War II had lessened the Navy's need for the massive aircraft, and they decreased their order to 6 and had her redesigned as a transport. The redesign involved the removal of gun turrets, bomb bay doors and armor plating, the addition of cargo handling equipment, cargo hatches, and the decking was reinforced. The first Mars was named the Hawaii and was delivered to the Navy in June of 1945. She was followed by the Marianas, Philippine, Marshall, Caroline, and a second Hawaii to replace the original, which was destroyed in an accident. The Mars served the U.S. Navy until 1956, predominantly on the Pacific flights between California and Hawaii, and established airlift and endurance records, many of which they still hold today. In 1959, the 4 remaining flying boats were sold to a Canadian company to serve as firefighting tankers, and today 2 still serve in this role.
In the lonely skies over Reykjavik in distant Iceland, Norway's exiled air force rises to meet the Nazi threat. It is March of 1940, and the early battles of World War II are raging. The Royal Norwegian Naval Air Service orders 24 Northrop N3PB patrol bombers to replace their aging MF-11 biplanes. This is the first aircraft designed by the newly formed Northrop Aircraft Incorporated. But before they can be delivered from the United States, disaster strikes. Norway is invaded by Nazi Germany, and in the face of overwhelming superiority, capitulation is quick. Pilots scramble frantically to evacuate what remains of Norway's aircraft to Sweden, Finland, and most of all, Great Britain. Those who manage to escape the occupation flee to England, where they nurse their anger and plot revenge. These Norwegian exiles form No. 330 Squadron in Reykjavik, now trusted with the same Northrop aircraft that were destined for the Navy Air Service. Though nominally under RAF command, the squadron is staffed exclusively by Norwegians. Their primary duty is to escort the Canadian and American convoys, which cross the vast reaches of the North Atlantic. At this point, the U-boat threat is at its greatest, and Nazi wolf packs prowl the ocean, preying on unguarded supply ships destined for Britain and the USSR. And for this, the N3PB is well suited. A single Wright Cyclone 1200 horsepower engine gives it a range of 1,400 miles, enough to patrol the shipping routes of the icy Atlantic. 30 and 50 caliber machine guns help keep it safe from the Luftwaffe fighters, and 2,000 pounds of bombs stand ready to sink attacking ships of the Kriegsmarine. The crew consists of a pilot, navigator, and radio operator. 3 flights are established in Reykjavik, Akureyri, and Budareyri, each flying 4 planes. The Norwegian government in exile pays for the upkeep and maintenance costs, and their squadrons are soon re-equipped with short Sunderlands and de Havilland Mosquitoes. By the time all is said and done, Norwegian squadrons No. 330 and 333 have made a valiant contribution to winning the war and liberating their homeland.
The Saunders-Roe Princess was the last of the giant flying boats. With the exception of Howard Hughes' Spruce Goose, the Princess was the largest flying boat ever built, and in May of 1946 work began on 3 prototypes of this gentle giant. The Princess was nicknamed the Double Bubble and designated the SR-45. She was intended to fly the non-stop transatlantic route from Southampton to New York, carrying 105 lucky travelers on her luxury-outfitted twin deck. The Princess was powered by 10 Bristol Proteus 600 turboprop engines that were housed in 6 engine nacelles mounted in the wings. The 2 outboard engines powered single propellers, while the 4 inboard engines were the Bristol coupled Proteus. With a wingspan of 220 feet, nearly 150 feet from nose to tail, and a height of more than 55 feet, the complete Princess weighed in at a massive 190,000 pounds.
It may not have been the quickest or the most visually appealing aircraft in World War II. It wasn't the easiest plane to handle, yet the PBY Catalina flying boat became one of the most dependable and respected aircraft ever made.
It was a good airplane. Low altitude, rough weather. She was a tough little beast.
In service, this straightforward, sturdy, and adaptable aircraft proved to be the perfect workhorse across the globe. Capable of operating on both land and water, the Catalina transported supplies, performed long-range patrols, and rescued countless stranded sailors and airmen.
That airplane did everything it was asked to do, and more.
However, it also possessed a darker, more threatening side. In the Atlantic, Catalinas bombed and sank numerous German submarines. In the Pacific, black-painted Catalinas swooped on Japanese ships under cover of night. In 1907, a young motorcycle builder from Hammondsport, New York, developed a fascination with the thrill of flight. His name was Glenn H. Curtiss, and he would be forever remembered as the creator of a unique type of aircraft. Curtiss was a natural-born inventor. After various experiments, he developed an aircraft capable of taking off and landing on water, the flying boat. It wasn't long before the military took notice. In World War I, flying boats were heavily used as reconnaissance planes, primarily for submarine spotting. This marked the start of a new era in naval warfare.
In the First World War, the U.S. Navy really didn't have a land plane capability, so the backbone of U.S. Navy operations was the flying boat. And during World War I, they developed the NC flying boat, which was designed to be a long-range aircraft capable of flying great distances across the Atlantic, which, in fact, one of them did in May of 1919.
After the war, hundreds of surplus planes were sold at low prices, sparking the aviation passion that had gripped America. The flying boat's ability to operate on any calm water surface granted it nearly limitless range, expanding new horizons for aviation. When Pan American launched its luxurious clipper flights to Central and South America, the golden age of the flying boat had dawned. Much like Grand Ocean liners, Pan Am clippers of the 1930s allowed the wealthy to travel in elegance to far-off places. The Navy also envisioned a strategic role for long-range aircraft to patrol the world's oceans, providing early warnings of any threats to American interests. Soon, the flying boat became an essential element of national defense planning.
The main advantages of the flying boat over wheeled aircraft, certainly in the early stages before the advent of the aircraft carrier, was the great range that they had. Plus, they could land almost anywhere, so they could set down in any number of forward bases. And so that's what made the flying boat a real advantageous platform for Navy operations, particularly in the Pacific, where the Navy was definitely looking towards fighting the next war.
In 1933, the Navy invited proposals for a new long-range patrol aircraft. The Consolidated Aircraft Corporation, already experienced in designing flying boats for the Navy, was eager to win this critical contract. Their lead designer was a skilled engineer named Isaac Macklin Ladden, known to everyone as Mac. In the early 1930s, most planes were still biplanes, with fabric-covered wings held up by a web of steel wires. In a bold approach, Mac Ladden designed a metal monoplane. Its vast wing was mounted on a single pylon above the fuselage, anchored to the hull with only 4 struts, 2 on each side. All flying boats required outrigger floats for stability on water, but these floats became a drawback in the air, creating drag and reducing overall performance. Mac Ladden devised a clever solution, designing floats that folded up during flight to become the wingtips, minimizing drag while adding lift. The Navy was duly impressed, and in June 1935, Consolidated secured a contract for 60 aircraft, the largest military order since World War I. The aircraft that rolled off the production line would become iconic, identified by the code letters PBY, P for patrol, B for bomber, and Y, the prefix for consolidated. The PBY was a sizable plane with a striking appearance.
Here were all those great big beautiful PBYs. It was love at first sight. And I said, well, I've got to fly those.
Along came a PBY, and it was gracefully soaring above us. And it was so beautiful. In my mind, it was like a soaring eagle. It just soared and made slow turns. And later on, I found out what a devil it could be in combat.
PBY, the Navy calls her. Back in 1935, the first PBYs took to the water and the air. Commonplace today, but then a milestone in the history of aviation.
It became best known as the Catalina, or simply the Cat. With a cruising speed of just over 130 miles per hour, the twin-engine Catalina wasn't especially fast, but it offered remarkable endurance with a range exceeding 3,000 miles and the ability to stay airborne for more than 15 hours. Though it was always susceptible to attack, the PBY's main armament was formidable. It included 2 heavy machine guns mounted in blisters on each side of the rear fuselage. Although initially designed for patrol missions, the PBY could carry 4 1,000-pound bombs or 2 torpedoes, significantly boosting its tactical value for the Navy.
The PBY did everything it was asked to do and more. It covered a lot of ground, and it could remain aloft for a great deal of time. Basically, though, it was designed to spot the enemy fleet. Radar was just in its infancy then, and nothing could beat a pair of 2 human eyes in spotting the fleet and reporting it back to home base.
By the late 1930s, the world was becoming increasingly dangerous. In the Pacific, Japan was growing more powerful and aggressive, while in Europe, Hitler's Germany was rearming openly, building a navy to control the Atlantic. Britain and America watched with caution as tensions continued to rise. Both countries recognized that airborne early warning would be crucial in future conflicts. Most admirals still placed their confidence in large gun-armed warships, but a few suspected that air power would decide any upcoming war. They would soon see how accurate this belief was. September 1939, Europe is thrust into war. Britain's first line of defense was the Royal Navy. Many of its ships were equipped with seaplanes launched by catapult to scout beyond the horizon. The challenge was retrieving them. The open sea posed serious risks for landing an aircraft. Multi-engine, long-range patrol planes offered a safer alternative, but Britain's strained RAF didn't have nearly enough of them. In 1940, they ordered a fleet of PBYs to aid in patrolling the Atlantic. It was the RAF pilots who first named the aircraft Catalina. They appreciated the aircraft and soon realized that the B in PBY truly signified bomber. They began using their Catalinas to attack German U-boats. Since the start of the war, Nazi submarine wolf packs had prowled the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, sinking numerous British vessels. The Catalina quickly became a crucial asset in the fight against U-boats, locating and destroying them in growing numbers. However, Germany's formidable surface fleet continued to pose a grave threat. In May 1941, the Cat played a role in securing a significant British naval victory. The Royal Navy was chasing the German battleship Bismarck, 42,000 tons of steel, and the pride of Hitler's battle fleet. In a clash west of Iceland, Bismarck had sunk the British battleship HMS Hood with a direct hit. Only 3 of her crew members survived. The Bismarck then disappeared into the fog.
Somewhere under that mystery of fog, the Bismarck was steaming under forced draft for a safe haven. Then a rift in the clouds, a telltale wake. A Catalina flashed the word, "Quarry sighted."
It was an RAF Catalina patrol plane from Coastal Command that finally tracked down the Bismarck. Its location was relayed, and Britain's Royal Navy moved in to finish the job. The Bismarck went down with only 115 of the 2,400 crew members surviving.
Britain had maintained her supremacy in the North Atlantic with the help of a plane designed to maintain United States supremacy in the Pacific.
The attack on the Bismarck clearly highlighted the value of long-range patrol aircraft in combat. The U.S. quickly took note.
The destruction of the Bismarck, that great and powerful ship, had to be accomplished to be true to the traditions of the British Royal Navy.
They played their part in a victory which is proudly marked up along with victories of the past, the greatest pursuit and kill in history.
The long-range Catalina was an ideal aircraft for ocean patrols, though getting it in and out of the water required cumbersome beaching gear, making the process slow and laborious. To address this issue, the PBY-5A was introduced, with A standing for amphibian. Featuring a retractable undercarriage, this version of the Cat was equally capable on land or sea. Catalinas were soon stationed at U.S. bases throughout the Pacific, from Midway to the Philippines and from Wake Island to Pearl Harbor. As Japan grew increasingly aggressive, the Navy intensified its daily reconnaissance flights. Then, on a calm Sunday morning in December 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the Pacific Fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor.
So I've seen them coming around one by one. They'd strafe and bomb, and then they make a circle and come around again. They must have made 3 or 4 passes on each attack. You couldn't believe it, and you didn't think it was happening. The whole sky was black with smoke. Everything was on fire, and there was dead people on the dock, and the oil was 3 feet thick on the water, and people were going around. It was utter confusion.
The assault not only crippled the American Pacific Fleet, but nearly obliterated the airborne patrol force, with 67 Catalinas severely damaged or destroyed.
They picked a beautiful time. Everybody was saluting the flag. And they weren't saluting their guns.
Pearl Harbor served as a harsh lesson for the Americans. Despite extensive long-range patrols, U.S. forces failed to spot the approaching Japanese fleet. In the aftermath, recruitment offices across the nation were flooded with young volunteers eager to join the fight.
I was very highly agitated at what happened out at Pearl Harbor. We weren't told too much about what happened other than it was a big blow to the fleet. And I joined the Navy the next day thinking that I got to go. December 8th, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor. My father was going to be the big stopper in my mind. When I came home that afternoon, and he said, "How was school?" I gave him the papers that I needed to get his signature on. And he thought for a long time. And he said, "Well, I'm too old to go, and we're going to be at war." And he said, "You go." And he signed, with tears in his eyes.
Smoke from the burning wreckage at Pearl Harbor lingered for days. But with America now at war, Catalina crews, still reeling from the devastating loss, would soon be at the forefront.
The feel at that time was, we've got to do something, and we've got to do it fast.
Early in 1942, new Catalinas began rolling off the production lines to replace those lost at Pearl Harbor. As new orders flooded into the consolidated factory, the demand for more workers grew in the race to accelerate production.
I'd put on my application that I'd worked with some radios, and of course the interviewer had a drawer that he opened up and he said, "What's that?" I said, "It's a soldering iron." "What's that?" "That's a wire cutter." "You're an electrician." So I became an electrician, and that was when the company was building from very few people, just hiring all the time. And they're consolidated. We were working 11 hours a day and 7 days a week.
The Cat quickly earned the respect and admiration of its crews. A standard PBY crew was composed of 8 members, a bombardier who also served as the bow gunner, a pilot and co-pilot, a navigator, a radio operator, a flight engineer, and 2 waist gunners. Bulkheads divided the plane into 7 watertight compartments. For long patrol flights, the central section was fitted with bunks and a galley to increase crew comfort. Mastering the specialized skill of flying a seaplane required extensive training.
Well, if you ever saw what I call a PBY driver, he had thick wrists and big muscles.
The controls were as big as barn doors, and it took a little bit of muscle to move them. It was unstable. She'd fall off on one wing, or horse would wander unless you had to fly it every minute of the time. It had the smallest stabilizing tabs, which you had to constantly readjust. Every time somebody moved or the load shifted just a little bit, you had to readjust it. You couldn't relax very long in that airplane, not if you were flying it.
And the real trick on a seaplane landing at any time is to make sure you keep your wings level. You do not want to get afloat into the water at high speed, because it'll turn you around so fast it'll be a wreck.
When you come into land, why, it's a high angle, and then boom, down you come, and it really hits hard, because you haven't got no control all of a sudden. Why, you put it into just about a stall just when you about to get to the water, just splat, you come down pretty hard. It landed with a great big splash. Not a touchdown, it was a beautiful landing. But if you didn't keep coming back all the time till you got that big fat duck plowing through the water, then she'd go off the water, because there weren't any flaps, anything to kill the speed. That's the one thing about that thing that I consider pretty vicious.
While the PBY had its drawbacks, it also had considerable strengths. As crews learned to operate it, they developed a deep respect for this durable workhorse.
It's a good airplane, very good. Low altitude, rough weather, rain squalls, and she was a tough little beast.
Like a giant seabird, the Catalina glided above the ocean on its lengthy solitary patrols. Its crew would spend hours out of sight of land, scanning the water for the faint sign of a submarine periscope or a downed pilot adrift in a life raft. Keeping the engines running for hours on end was the responsibility of the flight engineer. From his cramped compartment within the wing support, he communicated with the pilot through a system of indicator lights.
The only thing the pilot has regarding the engines in the cockpit are the throttles. Everything else is back there in a tower. He relies on his engineer.
It was the navigator's role to chart their course and ensure the safe return of the aircraft.
It's nice to know where you are. Every once in a while, a crew member that wasn't doing anything would come up and look over your shoulder and said, "Where are we?" Well, you put your finger, right there. But they did trust you, no doubt about it. But sometime, you're going to be lost. You won't know where you are. So what do? You turn around and go back, and you don't know where to go back to? Do you think, well, my sense tells me that land is over there and water's over here, or what do?
In poor weather conditions, this could become an almost impossible challenge. Many lone Catalinas disappeared without a trace in the vast Pacific Ocean. The radio operator served as the only connection to the outside world. His Morse code signals would send critical early warnings of enemy activity back to the base. Soon, the Catalina crews would play a pivotal role in the legendary sea battle that would alter the entire trajectory of the war in the Pacific. Midway.
Midway Island. Not much land, right enough, but it's our outpost. A Navy patrol plane. Routine patrol. Only behind every cloud may be an enemy.
Following the calamity at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese continued to push back American forces across the Pacific. In June 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy dispatched a massive task force to seize American-held Midway Island, located 1,100 miles northwest of Pearl Harbor. The primary goal was to lure the remaining ships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a confrontation and destroy them. However, the Japanese codes had been deciphered, and the defenders were aware that an attack was imminent. What they didn't know was the precise location of the task force.
Up until the Battle of Midway, the U.S. Navy, quite frankly, was not having a good war. They had only been able to score some hit-and-run raids against Japanese islands. So the Battle of Midway was very much a showdown in which the U.S. Navy was going to put it all on the line to stop the Japanese fleet.
On the morning of June 3rd, a Catalina patrol aircraft located the leading vessels of the Japanese task force. At dawn the next day, another Catalina finally identified the remaining ships, including the aircraft carriers. A large contingent of American carrier planes took off to engage the Japanese battle fleet. However, the waves of dive bombers faced superior Japanese fighters and suffered devastating losses. Then, in just 10 minutes, the tide shifted dramatically. American dive bombers targeted 3 Japanese aircraft carriers while their decks were crowded with planes being rearmed and refueled. Without air cover, the massive carriers became easy targets and quickly succumbed to American assaults. Later that day, a 4th Japanese aircraft carrier was also lost. Midway represented a catastrophic defeat for the Japanese and marked a pivotal turning point in the Pacific War at sea. At last, U.S. forces achieved a decisive victory, marking the first time the Japanese were forced onto the defensive.
In the Battle of Midway, there were some elements that played a great role, and certainly that was finding where the Japanese fleet was. And code breaking played a role in that, but it still required an aircraft to spot the ships. And it was here that the PBY played a pivotal role in the battle because it was PBYs that spotted not only the invasion force destined for Midway, but more importantly, spotted the carrier force.
The Catalina had demonstrated its capabilities beyond any doubt, but even before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Navy had already commissioned its intended successor.
The battleship of the air, the Coronado, the mightiest seaborne aircraft now in service.
The Coronado, known as the battleship of the air, was the most formidable seaborne aircraft ever constructed. This 4-engine Coronado was significantly larger and more advanced, yet it cost 3 times as much to produce as the Catalina and was a very intricate machine. In contrast, the Cat was straightforward to manufacture in large quantities, allowing it to remain the Navy's primary workhorse. Much like Henry Ford's Model T, it was slow but reliable and got the job done. However, every crewman flying a Catalina understood that, despite its armament, the sluggish Cat had little chance of surviving an encounter with Japanese fighters. Those long and solitary ocean patrols became some of the most perilous missions of the entire Pacific War.
The Catalina has been called the cruiser of the air. Her wing spread is 105 feet. Her length from nose to tail is 65 feet. She can carry a load of many tons. Her range, fully loaded, is over 4,000 miles, and the PBYs, new and old, have stood up to all the tasks imposed by modern war.
Yet, sometimes, the odds were simply insurmountable. During his first combat patrol in August 1942, Bob Dimmitt's Catalina was unexpectedly attacked by 3 Japanese fighters.
They were real show-offs. They would corkscrew in and roll. I watched one of them coming in on our tail there, and he was just lazily doing rolls and shooting at us. I guess they figured that this was a big duck and it was going. Our radioman was killed. He was sitting right behind me. The mechanic was shot through the chest, and those were the 2 big casualties that we had. The rest of us all had small shrapnel in us.
Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the Japanese Zeros vanished. 1 man was killed, another was severely wounded, and the Cat sustained significant damage.
And when we got away from there, our port engine was starting to burn. But that sucker flew, and we noticed some dots on the horizon. Never saw such pretty pieces of palm trees in our life.
Somehow, they managed to crash land the injured Catalina in shallow water, skidding to a stop on the beach.
We stopped. Then we started getting kind of worried, because we really didn't know at that time where we were and whether it was friendly or enemy. So we climbed out of the airplane and stood there with our big 45s in our hands and waited.
After a week stranded on their tropical island, Bob Dimmitt and his crew began to wonder how long they could endure before assistance arrived or the Japanese came.
All of a sudden we see this dot just off the water underneath this black cloud heading right for us, and it looked like a seaplane. Well, at that time we didn't know whether it was a Japanese seaplane or whether it was an American seaplane, so we didn't do anything. And we waited and waited and waited till the last minute, and then we could finally make out that it was a Catalina. And we were jumping up and down and yelling at him, but Santa Claus has nothing on that airplane. The relief that you feel when you have a friend that just flies by like that, there is, well, you can't describe it. We know then that we're home free.
All but one of Bob's crew made it through the ordeal, thanks to the Catalina. Such close calls had a lasting impact.
Hey, I got news for you. They were all brothers under the skin, boy, after that one there, and there was no doubt about that. We stayed close for a long time. Yeah.
Usually bonding shows up after an incident or an accident. If the pilot manages to evade and get the plane back without being shot down, he is the biggest thing in the world to that crew. So now they've bonded to the pilot, and the crew has bonded together as one. You could see it happen, and when I was on the islands in the South Pacific and the PBYs would come back from their patrol, you could tell that there's a changeover. All of a sudden, they're like brothers. You can't come between them.
Not surprisingly, every American GI in the Pacific grew fond of the Cat. Its recognizable and reassuring silhouette in the sky was always a welcome sight. For troops isolated on remote coral islands, it meant receiving mail from home. For the injured, it brought crucial medical supplies and a ride to the safety of a base hospital. For survivors adrift for days in the vast ocean, it symbolized life itself. And for the men who piloted it, the Cat became part of the family.
Oh yes. Every hop we came back on, the airplane was our baby. We loved it. We put it to bed at night, wake it up in the morning, and if we had any long flights, it never occurred to us that anything was going to go wrong.
The Cats operated in the most basic conditions, and their crews learned to be almost completely self-sufficient.
You had to be self-sufficient. And those planes were on their own. They'd be at some out-of-the-way island in a cove, and there'd be some 55-gallon drums of fuel and some oil. You lived in the plane, and you ate, cooked, and lived in the plane.
Whether on land or at sea, the big Cats were most susceptible to Japanese air attacks between their missions. However, many of their forward bases were carved out of the jungle and not easily visible from above. The long-distance missions across the Pacific placed immense stress on the aircraft and the dedicated ground crews who kept them operational with only the most rudimentary tools.
Preventative maintenance is the secret to the whole thing. The old saying goes, you can't pull off the road and call for a wrecker. If you have a problem, you lose an engine, you're going to have to return to base. You have a full crew, full ammo, full gas load. Perish the thought that you lose an engine on takeoff.
The remote jungle bases lacked workshop facilities, but this did not deter the Catalina. It came equipped with its own set of folding work platforms that could be attached to the engines.
There you were on the platform. You could work in the whole accessory section.
After a specified number of flight hours, each engine required a thorough inspection.
Each check would be more intense. And you hate to see them coming because that meant that it was going to be work. Not just flying, it was going to be work. You had to get yourself 30. And then you would have the 30, 60, 90, and 120-hour check. Now, 120 hour takes quite a long time. That's 120 hours in the air. Now the airplane's going to be down for a couple of days. In wartime, that's not really well thought of, but it has to happen. So you can imagine that there's a lot of fellas, a lot of mechanics, really running all over that airplane to get it back in the air. That's one thing a pilot doesn't want, is have his airplane on the deck. It's not what it's built for.
A strong bond formed between the pilot and the chief engineer, as lives depended on their combined expertise. Before every mission, they would meticulously inspect the aircraft together.
It's the rapport that you develop with the pilot. And if you're the chief aboard, or if you're the senior man aboard, or if you're the flight engineer, you're a little bit closer to the pilot than the rest of the crew. He'll come to you first. But he's still in charge. I realized I was the man behind the wrench. I wasn't the man up front driving. Pilot drives it. I fix it.
It's an airplane that you could fix with duct tape or something like that. If it had been too complicated, it wouldn't have been able to do the job.
Yet this reliable companion could also reveal a much more aggressive aspect of its character. When night fell, the gentle Cat would turn into a formidable predator.
Guadalcanal
is the most hotly contested strip of land in the South Pacific. For 5 months have tried to win back this vital outpost, but their transports, bombed and beached, lie wrecked on the sands of the Solomon Islands.
While Midway marked a turning point at sea, it was Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands that ultimately halted the Japanese ground advance. The situation was dire as the Japanese funneled troops and supplies into battle, desperately attempting to push American forces back into the sea. The success of the entire Japanese operation hinged on regular supply runs conducted by a fleet of transport ships operating under the cover of night, protected by destroyers and light cruisers known as the Tokyo Express. The only chance for an American victory lay in severing this vital supply line. This goal was ultimately achieved with the assistance of an unexpected weapon.
Anything familiar? That torso with a middle-aged sag? Her speed less than some cars can do. Got her? Right. The old Cat. Navy Catalina patrol boat, PBY in a black nightgown for night camouflage. A black cat.
It was called the Black Cat because they flew at night, and the plane was painted perfectly black.
Despite its age, the Catalina was leading the way in a new type of covert operation that would become an increasingly significant aspect of modern warfare.
During the day, to launch a PBY on any sort of attack mission would have been suicide because it was a slow and lumbering aircraft. But those attributes made it really particularly suited to night combat, where it could loiter over targets and search for them really at will.
For every pound of bombs dropped last month, 1 ton of enemy shipping was sunk or damaged. Records like that mean plenty in any language, dollars or yen.
The concept was simple, yet highly effective. Take a standard PBY Catalina patrol plane, coat it in matte black from nose to tail, conceal its glowing exhaust pipes above the wings, and switch off all navigation lights. Then attach 4,000 pounds of bombs under its wings, transforming it into a formidable weapon. This was the Black Cat, the original stealth bomber.
Another night, another mission, another prowl into the dark. A cat needs its 9 lives on these jobs.
Back at Pearl Harbor, the surprise attack by the Japanese had severely weakened the Catalina fleet. Now, shrouded in darkness, the Cats sought their revenge. This time, it would be the Japanese who were caught off guard. These long-range missions were always tense and exhausting for the Catalina crews.
Skipper always had us doing things. And he'd say, you guys in the blisters, I want you to keep an eye out. And if he ever saw anything, and we didn't see it first, we was in bad trouble. we reported seeing something before he did, or he'd said, all right, what's going on back there? Do you guys sound asleep?
Without radar, the Japanese forces struggled to detect the Cats in the darkness. Even powerful searchlights often failed to reveal their presence, leaving defenders to fire blindly into the night sky in hopes of hitting something.
The searchlight would be right on us, and nobody shot at us. The searchlight come right on, and everything gets all light up in the plane. Said, "Uh-oh!" We just kept right on going, and the light went off somewhere else. So they never did see us. Never would see us.
The attacks had to be executed on the first pass to maintain the element of surprise. But the slow-flying Cat had ample opportunity to align itself with the target.
We dropped bombs. We dropped everything we had. And I don't know, because we never did, nobody ever went down to see what had happened because that was Japanese territory.
One more flight completed. One less convoy flying the rising sun. Another loss in losses adding up to billions of dollars in equipment that didn't get there.
In just 1 month, a single squadron reported the destruction of 43 Japanese ships as the Black Cats prowled the night skies, most of their victims unaware of what had struck them. Deprived of essential supplies, the Japanese lost their hold on the Solomon Islands and began a long and bloody retreat back to their home islands. At a pivotal moment in history, the Black Cat squadrons, engaging in nighttime hunting and bombing missions, played a crucial role in turning the tide of the war in the Pacific.
A job done by planes that can't maneuver but do, that can't dive, that can't rev up speed to wiggle out of a run but go in anyway for a second try, a third. And every less ship gives the men who are landing a better break. That's what keeps the cats flying.
When production ceased, nearly 4,000 Catalinas had been constructed, making it the most numerous flying boat ever created.
In a variety of services with a variety of nations, the PBY did everything in almost every theater of war. It dropped bombs, it dropped torpedoes, it depth-charged U-boats, it fired retro rockets. It was the Dumbo for down flyers, the salvation and savior for them when they're floating in the open ocean with little chance of rescue without the PBY. So in short, the PBY performed all missions that it was called upon to do and performed them with great ability.
After the war, while many military aircraft were scrapped, the Cats continued to serve due to their immense utility. Wherever there was water, the Catalina found a peacetime role, conducting Coast Guard patrols, firefighting, cargo transport, passenger flights, exploration, surveying, and a multitude of other tasks. Though the jet age marked the decline of most remaining flying boats, the Cats persevered. As the new millennium approached, the consolidated PBY Catalina remained in the air, one of the longest-serving and most beloved aircraft in history.
That airplane, I fell in love with it.
All I could say was, Mr. Consolidated, you did a hell of a job.